The February wind cut through Boulder like a knife, carrying with it the promise of snow that hadn't yet arrived. It was 2010, and the small college town nestled against the Flatirons seemed frozen in time, suspended between winter's grip and the hope of spring. On this particular Thursday afternoon, the streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people hurry home before darkness settles over the mountains. Sarah Parker stood at the kitchen window of their modest two-story home on Spruce Street, watching the bare branches of the elm tree scratch against the gray sky. She had lived in Boulder for 23 years, ever since she and her husband David had moved here from Chicago, drawn by the promise of a simpler life and cleaner air. They had raised Emily here, watched her grow from a curious toddler into a thoughtful teenager who loved poetry and spent hours at the public library. "Mom, I'm heading out," Emily's voice called from the hallway. Sarah turned from the window, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Emily appeared in the doorway, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore her favorite navy blue hoodie and jeans, the same outfit she wore almost every day. At 17, Emily had developed a consistent uniform, claiming it made life simpler not having to decide what to wear each morning. "Library again?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Emily had been spending most of her afternoons there for the past few months, supposedly working on college applications and studying for her upcoming exams. "Yeah, I need to finish that research paper for English." Emily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, a habit she'd had since childhood when she was anxious or in a hurry. "Mrs. Henderson said she'd help me with the citations." Sarah noticed something different in her daughter's eyes that afternoon, though she couldn't quite place what it was. A distance, perhaps, a preoccupation that went beyond homework. But teenage girls were mysterious creatures, and Sarah had learned over the years that pushing too hard only drove them further away. "Will you be home for dinner? Your father's working late, but I thought we could order from that Thai place you like." Emily paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame. For a moment she looked like she wanted to say something, her mouth opening slightly before closing again. Then she smiled, that same bright smile that had charmed teachers and neighbors since she was 5 years old. "Sounds good. I'll be back by 6. She hesitated, then added, "Love you, Mom." "Love you too, sweetheart." The door closed with a soft click and Sarah heard Emily's footsteps on the porch, then the squeak of the gate as she left. Through the window, Sarah watched her daughter walk down Spruce Street toward the bus stop on Broadway, her figure growing smaller until she turned the corner and disappeared. That was the last time Sarah Parker saw her daughter. By 7 o'clock that evening, when Emily hadn't returned and wasn't answering her cell phone, Sarah felt the first flutter of genuine concern. By 8, when calls to Emily's friends yielded nothing but confusion and growing worry, that concern had transformed into fear. By 9, when David finally came home from his shift at the hospital and they drove to the Boulder Public Library, only to find it closed and dark, fear had become panic. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, when they finally reached her at home, sounded genuinely puzzled. "Emily? No, I didn't see her today. See her. We had that conversation about citations last week. I assumed she'd finished her paper already." David Parker, a trauma surgeon at Boulder Community Health, was a man accustomed to emergencies. He knew how to remain calm when others panicked, how to make quick decisions under pressure. But standing in the empty library parking lot with his wife sobbing beside him, he felt something he'd never experienced in 20 years of medicine: complete helplessness. They called the police at 9:47 p.m. Officer Martinez arrived at their home by 10:15, a young woman with kind eyes and a notepad that would soon be filled with details that led nowhere. She asked the standard questions. Had Emily seemed upset? Was she having trouble at school? Did she have a boyfriend? Any history of running away? "No, nothing like that," Sarah insisted, her voice hoarse from crying. "Emily's a good kid. She gets straight A's. She's applying to colleges. She wouldn't just leave." But even as Sarah said those words, she realized how little she truly knew about her daughter's inner life. What did 17-year-olds think about when they stared at their phones for hours? What secrets did they keep from their parents? Emily had always been private, thoughtful, the kind of child who processed her feelings internally before sharing them. Had that privacy been hiding something darker? Officer Martinez took notes and promised they would do everything possible. She explained that the first 48 hours were critical, that most missing teenagers returned home within that time frame. She photographed Emily's room, collected a hairbrush for DNA, and took Emily's laptop to examine her digital footprint. The house felt impossibly empty after the officer left. Sarah and David sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten thousands of meals with their daughter, and tried to make sense of what couldn't be understood. "Maybe she did run away," David said quietly, voicing what neither of them wanted to acknowledge. "Maybe there's something going on that we don't know about." Sarah shook her head violently. "She said she loved me. Right before she left, she said..." Her voice broke. "That wasn't goodbye. That was just normal." "But was it?" Sarah replayed the moment in her mind, examining every detail like a detective studying evidence. The way Emily had hesitated at the door, the strange look in her eyes, that last "I love you" that now felt weighted with meaning it hadn't carried just hours before. By midnight, David was on the phone with Emily's friends, despite the late hour. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Jessica Chen, Emily's best friend since middle school, sounded genuinely shocked. "Mr. Parker, I swear I don't know anything. Emily's been, I don't know, different lately, more withdrawn. But I thought she was just stressed about college stuff." "Different how?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "She stopped eating lunch with us about a month ago, said she preferred spending that time in the library, and she quit orchestra. That was weird because she loved playing violin." This was news to David and Sarah. Emily had been in the school orchestra for 4 years, had talked about continuing music in college. When had she quit, and why hadn't she told them? The next morning, Friday, February 19th, Boulder woke to the news that Emily Parker was missing. The school distributed flyers with her photo, a recent picture from her junior year, showing her smiling at the camera, her dark eyes bright with the optimism of youth. By afternoon, those same flyers were posted on telephone poles throughout the city, in coffee shops and grocery stores, at the university campus, and in the windows of local businesses. Sarah and David's home became command central. Neighbors brought food and offered to help search. Emily's teachers stopped by to express their concern. The local news ran a story that evening, showing Emily's photo and asking anyone with information to contact the Boulder Police Department. But as the hours turned into days, and days into weeks, the initial frenzy of activity began to slow. Search parties combed the foothills and checked abandoned buildings. Divers searched the reservoirs. Dogs tracked scents that led nowhere. Emily's face appeared on missing person databases and true crime forums, her story discussed by strangers who had never known her but felt connected to her tragedy. Detective Linda Morrison took over the case in the second week. A veteran investigator with 17 years on the force, Morrison had seen her share of missing persons cases. She knew the statistics. Most missing teenagers either returned home on their own or were found within the first few days. The longer someone stayed missing, the more likely the outcome was tragic. Morrison interviewed everyone in Emily's life. She spoke to teachers, friends, classmates, the boy Emily had dated briefly the previous summer. She examined Emily's laptop and phone records, searching for clues in text messages and browsing history. What she found painted a picture of a typical teenage girl. Conversations about homework and boys, searches for college information, social media posts about music and movies. But there was one anomaly. In the weeks before her disappearance, Emily had been researching domestic violence shelters and legal emancipation. She'd visited websites about how to change your identity and start a new life. She'd searched for bus routes to other states and looked up information about work on farms that didn't require documentation. When Morrison shared this information with Sarah and David, they were stunned. "That doesn't make sense," Sarah insisted. We've never heard her. We're a good family. Why would she need to research domestic violence?" Morrison leaned forward, her expression gentle but probing. "Mrs. Parker, sometimes teenagers protect people they love. Is it possible Emily was involved with someone? An older boyfriend? Someone who might have been controlling or abusive?" David's jaw tightened. "If someone hurt my daughter, we don't know that yet," Morrison interrupted. "But these searches suggest Emily was planning something. Whether she was planning to leave, or trying to help someone else, or researching for a school project, we need to consider all possibilities." The investigation revealed one more troubling detail. Emily's bank account, which contained $800 she'd saved from babysitting jobs, had been emptied 2 days before her disappearance. She'd withdrawn the money in cash from an ATM on Canyon Boulevard, just 3 blocks from their house. She was planning to run away, Morrison concluded during a meeting with the Parkers in March, nearly a month after Emily's disappearance. All the evidence points to that. She withdrew her savings, researched how to disappear, and left with just her backpack. The question is why, and whether she left alone or with someone else. Sarah refused to accept it. "You're wrong. Someone took her. Someone hurt her. My daughter wouldn't just abandon us. She wouldn't do that." But as winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, with no trace of Emily Parker, even Sarah had to confront the possibility that her daughter had chosen to leave. And that realization in many ways was even more painful than imagining she'd been taken. Because if Emily had run away, it meant she'd been unhappy, desperate, frightened, and Sarah had failed to see it. The case grew cold as the months passed. New missing persons cases demanded attention. Media coverage dwindled. Life in Boulder continued, though the Parker family remained frozen in that February afternoon, forever waiting for a daughter who never came home. Sarah and David's marriage strained under the weight of grief and guilt. They attended support groups for families of missing persons, where they met other parents trapped in the same purgatory of not knowing. They maintained Emily's room exactly as she'd left it, a shrine to a life interrupted. And every year on February 18th, they held a vigil, hoping that somehow, somewhere, Emily would see it and know she was still loved, still wanted, still missed. The years blurred together. 2011, 2012, 2013. Emily's case file gathered dust in the Boulder Police Department's cold case archives. Her missing person poster faded in windows and on telephone poles until they were removed or covered by newer tragedies. The world moved on, because the world always does. But Sarah Parker never stopped looking. Every woman with dark hair and a certain build made her heart skip. Every news story about a found teenager made her hold her breath. She maintained a Facebook page called Find Emily Parker, posting updates and theories, keeping her daughter's memory alive in the digital world even as she faded from the physical one. 10 years, an entire decade passed. And then, on a warm afternoon in New Mexico in 2020, during a routine traffic stop on a dusty highway outside of Albuquerque, a state trooper asked a woman without identification for her name. She hesitated, her hands gripping the steering wheel of a battered pickup truck, and everything changed. State Trooper Carlos Mendez had been patrolling Highway 550 outside Albuquerque for 8 years, and he'd learned to trust his instincts. On this particular June afternoon in 2020, when he pulled over a faded blue pickup truck with an expired registration sticker, something about the driver immediately caught his attention. She was a woman in her late 20s, thin to the point of gauntness with dark hair streaked with premature gray pulled back in a braid. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, and when she turned to look at him through the window, her eyes held the wary alertness of someone who'd learned to expect the worst from any authority figure. "License and registration, please," Mendez said, keeping his tone neutral and professional. The woman's jaw tightened. She reached for the glove compartment with careful, deliberate movements, the kind of movements people made when they were trying not to appear threatening. She handed him the registration. The truck was registered to a Maria Sanchez from Las Cruces. But when he asked for her license, she shook her head. "I don't have one." Mendez had heard that response countless times, usually from undocumented immigrants or people with suspended licenses trying to avoid further trouble. But something about this woman's demeanor struck him as different. She wasn't defiant or evasive. She seemed resigned. "What's your name?" A pause, barely perceptible before she answered. "Ava Martinez. Can you spell that for me?" She did, but her voice wavered slightly on the last name, as if she had to think about it. Mendez made a note. He'd been trained to spot inconsistencies, and this woman was full of them. The truck was registered to someone else. She had no ID. She hesitated before giving her name, and there was something about her eyes, a depth of sadness that went beyond the normal anxiety of a traffic stop. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." She complied without protest, moving with the slow caution of someone who'd been through this before. As she stood beside the truck in the harsh New Mexico sunlight, Mendez noticed other details. Scars on her forearms, faded but visible, calluses on her hands that spoke of years of manual labor, clothes that were clean but worn thin from repeated washing. "Where are you headed today, Ms. Martinez?" "To Silver City. I have a job interview at a ranch." "And where are you coming from?" "Farmington. I've been working at a farm there for the past 2 years." Mendez radioed for backup and ran the name Ava Martinez through the system. Multiple hits came back. It was a common name, but none of the photos matched the woman standing before him. He tried variations, different spellings, different birth dates based on her apparent age. Nothing. When Officer Sarah Reyes arrived as backup 20 minutes later, Mendez filled her in on the situation. "Reyes, who had a background in human trafficking investigations, immediately recognized the signs. The lack of documentation, the transient lifestyle, the visible scarring, the fear barely concealed behind a mask of compliance. "Ma'am, are you in any danger?" Reyes asked gently. "If someone is forcing you to do something against your will, we can help you." The woman, Ava, or whoever she really was, looked at Reyes for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, her eyes filled with tears. "No one's forcing me to do anything," she said quietly. "Not anymore." That phrase, "not anymore," hung in the air between them. Reyes and Mendez exchanged glances. This was more complicated than a simple traffic stop. They brought her to the state police station in Albuquerque, not under arrest but as a person of interest who couldn't be identified. In the interview room, a small space with beige walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill, Reyes sat across from the woman and tried a different approach. "Look, we're not trying to get you in trouble," Reyes said, her voice gentle but firm. "But you're driving without a license, you have no identification, and the name you gave us doesn't match anyone in our system. We need to know who you are." The woman stared at her hands, at the calluses and scars that told stories she wasn't ready to share. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "If I tell you my real name, I need to know I'll be safe. I need guarantees." "Safe from what? From whom?" "From the past. From people finding me. From having to go back." Reyes leaned forward. "Are you wanted for a crime?" "No. But I left someone behind. Someone who would have destroyed me if I'd stayed." Over the next hour, piece by piece, the woman's story emerged. She'd been living under false identities for a decade, moving from farm to farm, ranch to ranch, always working for cash, always avoiding situations that required official documentation. She'd learned to disappear into the vast network of migrant agricultural workers, people who moved with the seasons, and asked few questions about each other's pasts. "Why?" Reyes pressed. "Why go through all this? Why not just live your life?" "Because I was running from someone, because if I'd stayed, I don't think I would have survived." "Who are you running from?" The woman's face hardened. "Does it matter? He's probably forgotten about me by now. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being no one." Reyes made a decision then, one that would change everything. "I want to help you, but I need something from you. Let us take your fingerprints and a DNA sample. Let us find out who you really are. Whatever you're running from, we can help, but we can't do anything if we don't know the truth." The woman considered this for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. The fingerprints came back within hours. No matches in the criminal database, but that wasn't surprising. What was surprising was when they ran the prints through the missing persons database and got a hit. A partial match to a case from Colorado. A girl who'd disappeared 10 years earlier, Emily Parker. Reyes stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Emily Parker had been 17 when she disappeared from Boulder in 2010. She would be 27 now, exactly the age of the woman sitting in their interview room. The fingerprints had been taken from Emily's room after her disappearance, lifted from a jewelry box and a notebook, but fingerprints alone weren't conclusive enough. They needed DNA. The DNA sample was sent to the lab with a rush order, marked as priority due to the potential match to a decade-old missing persons case. While they waited for results, a process that would take several days, Reyes contacted the Boulder Police Department. Detective Linda Morrison, now a lieutenant, received the call at her desk on a Tuesday morning. She'd thought about Emily Parker often over the years, the case that had never been solved, the girl who'd vanished without a trace. Morrison had retired the case to cold status 5 years earlier, convinced that Emily was either dead or so deeply hidden that she'd never be found. "You think you found her?" Morrison's voice was skeptical but hopeful. "After 10 years? The fingerprints are a strong match," Reyes explained. "And the woman's age, physical description, it all fits. But she won't confirm her identity. She's terrified of something, or someone. Let me pull the file. Give me an hour." Morrison dug through the archives, retrieving the thick folder on Emily Parker's disappearance. She reviewed the photos, the interviews, the evidence they'd collected. One detail stood out. Emily had a distinctive birthmark on her left shoulder blade, shaped like a small crescent moon, and a scar on her right shin from a bicycle accident when she was 12. "Check for those identifiers," Morrison told Reyes. "The birthmark and the scar. If she has both, we might have our match even before the DNA comes back." Reyes returned to the interview room where the woman who called herself Ava Martinez sat with a cup of coffee, looking exhausted and resigned. The past 10 years of running had taken their toll, visible in every line of her face. "I need to ask you something," Reyes said. "Do you have a birthmark on your shoulder blade?" The woman's eyes widened, and in that moment Reyes knew. The recognition, the fear, the sudden understanding that her past had finally caught up to her. "How do you know about that?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Because Emily Parker has that birthmark." Emily Parker, who disappeared from Boulder, Colorado in February of 2010. Emily Parker, whose parents have been searching for her for 10 years. The woman, Emily, closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears were streaming down her face. "I couldn't go back," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. I couldn't go back to him. I couldn't." "To who, Emily? Who couldn't you go back to?" But Emily shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces of herself together. "I need time. I need to think. This is all. It's too much." The DNA results came back 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon. The match was conclusive. The woman in the Albuquerque police station was Emily Rose Parker, missing for 10 years, presumed dead by many, now sitting in an interview room and refusing to explain why she disappeared. Morrison booked the next flight to Albuquerque. Before she left, she did something she'd been dreading but knew was necessary. She called Sarah and David Parker. Sarah answered on the second ring the way she always did, as if constantly expecting news about her daughter. "Mrs. Parker, this is Lieutenant Morrison from the Boulder Police Department. I need you to sit down. I have news about Emily." Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "Is she? Did you find? She's alive, Mrs. Parker?" "Emily is alive. She's in New Mexico, and she's safe." The sound that came through the phone was something Morrison had never heard before. A mixture of joy and grief and relief, so profound, it seemed to transcend words. Sarah sobbed, called for David, and Morrison heard the phone clatter as it was dropped. Heard David's confused voice asking what was wrong. Heard Sarah's broken words. "She's alive. Emily's alive." When they'd composed themselves enough to speak, Morrison gave them the basic details. Emily had been found during a traffic stop. She'd been living under false identities. The DNA match was conclusive, but Morrison was careful not to mention Emily's reluctance to return, her fear, the mysteries that still surrounded her disappearance. "When can we see her?" David's voice was hoarse with emotion. "When can we bring her home?" "Soon," Morrison promised. "But I need to talk to her first. I need to understand what happened, this case. It's more complicated than we thought." Morrison arrived in Albuquerque the next morning. In the interview room, she found a woman who bore only a passing resemblance to the smiling 17-year-old from the missing person posters. Emily had aged in ways that went beyond the passage of time. She looked weathered, haunted, as if she'd lived several lifetimes in those 10 years. "Emily," Morrison said gently, sitting down across from her. "I'm Lieutenant Morrison. I worked your case from the beginning. Your parents, they never stopped looking for you." Emily's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "I know. Then why? Why disappear? Why let them think you were dead?" Emily looked up, meeting Morrison's eyes for the first time. What Morrison saw there made her understand that this case was far from over. This wasn't a simple runaway story. This was something darker, more complex, more painful than anyone had imagined. "Because," Emily said slowly, "staying would have killed me. And I'm not talking about dying. I'm talking about losing every piece of who I was until there was nothing left. Tell me," Morrison urged. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." And finally, after 10 years of silence, Emily Parker began to speak. Lieutenant Morrison adjusted the recorder on the table between them, making sure every word would be captured. Emily Parker sat across from her, hands wrapped around a now cold cup of coffee, her eyes fixed on something only she could see, perhaps a memory from 10 years ago, perhaps the face of someone she'd been running from all this time. "Take your time," Morrison said softly. "Start wherever you feel comfortable." Emily took a shaky breath. "His name was Ryan Mitchell. I met him the summer before my senior year, 2009. He was 23, working at the climbing gym downtown. I thought he was everything I'd been waiting for." Morrison made a note. Ryan Mitchell. She'd need to run that name through every database available, see if he had a record, see if anyone else had reported similar experiences. He was charming at first, funny, attentive. He made me feel special, like I was the only person in the world who mattered. My parents didn't know about him. I knew they'd disapprove of the age difference, so I kept it secret. We'd meet after school, on weekends when I said I was at the library or with friends. Emily's voice grew quieter. each word seeming to cost her something. The first time he hit me was in November. I'd mentioned wanting to apply to colleges in California and he just snapped. He said I was trying to leave him, that I was ungrateful, that no one would ever love me the way he did. Then he grabbed my wrist so hard it left bruises for weeks. I wore long sleeves until they faded. Morrison felt her jaw tighten. This was a story she'd heard too many variations of throughout her career. Young women trapped in abusive relationships, unable to see the danger until it was almost too late. But Emily had seen it. Emily had escaped. The question was how, and at what cost. I tried to break up with him after that, but he showed up at my school at my house when my parents weren't home. He threatened to kill himself if I left him. He said he'd tell everyone at school that I'd been sleeping with him, ruin my reputation, make sure I never got into college. I was 17 and terrified and I didn't know what to do. Did you tell anyone, your parents? A teacher? A friend? Emily shook her head miserably. I was ashamed and scared. Ryan was so good at making me believe it was all my fault, that I provoked him, that if I just tried harder to make him happy, he'd stop. So I stayed, and it got worse. She paused, gathering strength to continue. By January 2010, I knew I had to get out, but I also knew that if I just broke up with him normally, he'd never let me go. He'd keep coming back, keep threatening, keep controlling my life. I started researching online, how to disappear, how to start over. I saved money from babysitting. I made a plan. Morrison leaned forward. The day you disappeared, February 18th, what happened that day? Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Ryan had been escalating. The violence was getting worse, more frequent. He'd started talking about how we should run away together after I graduated, how we'd get married and I'd forget about college. But that morning he told me something that changed everything. He said he'd been watching my house, that he knew my mother's schedule, my father's shifts at the hospital. He said if I ever tried to leave him, he'd hurt them to punish me. The threat against her parents had been the breaking point. Morrison understood that now. Emily hadn't just been running from Ryan, she'd been trying to protect her family. So you left. I told my mom I was going to the library. I got on a bus, but not the one to downtown. I took the bus to Denver instead. Ryan thought I was at the library, so I had a few hours before he'd start looking for me. In Denver, I bought a ticket to Albuquerque with cash. I threw my phone in a dumpster. I'd already withdrawn all my savings the week before. Morrison made more notes. This explained why the digital trail had gone cold so quickly. No phone, no credit cards, just cash and determination. I arrived in Albuquerque with $800 and nothing else. I was terrified Ryan would track me down, so I couldn't use my real name. I met a woman at the bus station who was heading to a farm in southern New Mexico. She said they needed workers and didn't ask questions, so I went with her. For the next hour, Emily described the decade she'd spent moving from farm to farm, ranch to ranch, living in trailers and bunkhouses, working grueling hours picking produce and tending livestock. She'd learned to live on almost nothing, to trust no one completely, to always have an escape plan. She'd used different names in different places: Ava Martinez, Lisa Rodriguez, Sarah Johnson. She'd avoided situations that required official documentation, staying in the shadows of the agricultural economy where cash was king and questions were rare. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, Emily said, her voice hollow. I missed my parents every single day. I missed my friends, my school, the idea of college. But every time I thought about going back, I'd remember Ryan's face, his threats, his violence, and I'd convince myself that staying disappeared was the only way to keep everyone safe. Did Ryan ever try to find you? I don't know. I never looked back, never searched for news from Boulder. I was too afraid of what I might find, or what might find me. Emily rubbed her eyes tiredly. After a few years, the fear started to fade, but by then, I didn't know how to come back. How do you explain to your parents that you let them think you were dead for years? How do you walk back into a life you abandoned? Morrison understood the psychology of it, the way trauma and fear could trap someone in a cycle of avoidance, but there was something else nagging at her, a piece that didn't quite fit. Emily, the research you did before you disappeared, you were looking at domestic violence shelters, legal resources. Why didn't you go to one of those places? Why not report Ryan to the police? Emily's laugh was bitter. Because I was 17 and stupid and scared. Because Ryan always said if I went to the police, he'd tell them I was making it up for attention. Because domestic violence shelters would have contacted my parents, and I couldn't tell my parents without putting them in danger. I thought disappearing completely was the only option. It was the tragic logic of an abused teenager, operating from a place of fear and limited options. Morrison had seen it before, though rarely to this extreme. "We're going to need to investigate Ryan Mitchell," Morrison said. "If he's still in Boulder, if he's a threat to anyone else, we need to know." Emily's face paled. "He can't know I'm alive if he finds out." "Emily, you're not 17 anymore, you're 27. You're an adult with rights and protections. If Ryan Mitchell threatened you, assaulted you, stalked you, those are crimes. We can prosecute him." "With what evidence? It's been 10 years. I have no proof, no photos, no medical records." "It's my word against his, and I'm the girl who disappeared and let her parents suffer for a decade." Morrison knew Emily had a point. Building a case against Ryan Mitchell after 10 years would be challenging, especially without physical evidence. But she'd pursue it anyway because that's what justice demanded. "Your parents want to see you," Morrison said, changing the subject. "They're flying in tomorrow. Are you ready for that?" Emily's composure cracked completely. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I don't know. I don't know if I can face them. The guilt. It's been eating me alive for years. They organized searches. They went on TV. They never gave up. And all that time I was alive and I didn't contact them. How do I explain that? How do I make them understand? They love you, Emily. That's what you need to understand. Yes, they'll have questions. Yes, there will be anger and grief and a lot of complicated emotions. But underneath all of that is love. They never stopped loving you. The reunion was scheduled for Sunday morning at the Albuquerque police station, in a private room where the Parkers could see their daughter for the first time in 10 years. Morrison had briefed them on what to expect, that Emily had changed, that she'd been through trauma, that the reunion wouldn't be the simple joy they'd imagined all these years. Sarah and David Parker arrived at 9 a.m., looking exhausted and anxious. Sarah had barely slept on the flight from Denver, her mind racing with questions and fears. What if Emily didn't remember them? What if she'd been brainwashed? What if she didn't want to come home? David had tried to prepare her for disappointment, his medical training making him pragmatic even in the face of miracle. But nothing could have prepared them for the reality. When Emily walked into the room, escorted by Officer Reyes, Sarah gasped. This wasn't the teenager she'd last seen. This was a woman, thin and weathered and bearing the marks of a hard life. But her eyes were the same. Those dark eyes that had looked up at Sarah from a crib, from a kindergarten classroom, from the doorway on that last terrible day. "Emily," Sarah whispered. Emily stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Sarah crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her daughter into an embrace, not caring that Emily was stiff with shock, not caring that years and secrets stood between them. David joined them a moment later, wrapping his arms around both his wife and his daughter, and for a moment they were a family again. But when they finally pulled apart, when they sat down around the table and tried to begin the impossible conversation, the fractures became visible. Sarah couldn't stop touching Emily's face, her hands, reassuring herself that this was real. David kept asking medical questions. Was she healthy? Had she been seeing a doctor? Did she need any treatment? And Emily sat between them, answering questions, but holding back the full truth, unable to explain the depth of her fear and desperation. "Why didn't you call?" Sarah asked finally, her voice breaking. "Even just once to let us know you were alive?" Emily looked at her mother, at the pain carved into her face by 10 years of not knowing. "Because I thought if I called, he'd find me. And if he found me, he'd hurt you to punish me. I thought disappearing completely was the only way to keep you safe." "Who?" David demanded. "Who would hurt us?" And so Emily told them about Ryan Mitchell, though she left out the worst details, unable to bear seeing her parents' faces as they learned how badly she'd been hurt. She told them about the threats, the violence, the fear that had driven her away. She told them about the years of farm work and false identities, the loneliness and the constant looking over her shoulder. Sarah and David listened in horror, realizing that while they'd been searching for their daughter, she'd been running for her life. And underneath their relief at having her back was a growing anger. At Ryan Mitchell for hurting their daughter, at themselves for not seeing the signs, at Emily for not trusting them enough to ask for help. "We could have protected you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "We could have gone to the police, gotten a restraining order, kept you safe." "I was 17, Emily shot back, some of her old spirit showing through. "I was terrified and isolated and I didn't know what else to do. I made the best choice I could with the information I had." The conversation went in circles. All of them trying to understand, trying to forgive, trying to find a path forward. Morrison, watching from the corner of the room, knew this was just the beginning of a long healing process. Families didn't recover from 10 years of separation overnight. There would be therapy, difficult conversations, moments of breakthrough and setback. But there was also the matter of Ryan Mitchell. Morrison had already started the investigation, running his name through every database, checking for a criminal record, looking for any complaints or incidents involving him. What she found was disturbing in its absence. Ryan Mitchell had no criminal record. He'd moved to Wyoming in 2012, worked at several climbing gyms and outdoor recreation centers. He'd gotten married in 2015, divorced in 2018. He appeared to be living a normal life. But Morrison knew that abusers often hid behind normal facades. She reached out to the ex-wife, a woman named Jennifer Mitchell who now lived in Montana. The phone conversation was brief but illuminating. "Did Ryan ever hurt you?" Morrison asked directly. A long pause. Then, "Why are you asking?" "We're investigating an incident from before your marriage, but if he hurt you, we need to know." Another pause, and then Jennifer's voice came through, shaky but determined. "He didn't hit me. Not really. But he was controlling. Jealous. He'd go through my phone, track my location, tell me what to wear and who I could talk to. By the end, I felt like I was suffocating. I filed for divorce when he started talking about how we should move somewhere remote, just the two of us, away from everyone. The pattern was clear. Ryan Mitchell might not have had a criminal record, but he had a history of controlling, abusive behavior. Morrison thanked Jennifer and hung up, then immediately called her contact at the Boulder Police Department. They needed to bring Ryan Mitchell in for questioning, but when they tried to locate him, they discovered something troubling. Ryan Mitchell had left Wyoming 3 months earlier and hadn't updated his address. His last known employer said he'd quit suddenly, mentioning something about heading back to Colorado. He'd closed his bank accounts, canceled his lease, effectively disappeared, and now Emily Parker had resurfaced. Morrison's blood ran cold as she realized the implication. Could Ryan have been monitoring news about Emily? Could he know she'd been found? And if he did, would he try to find her? She immediately called for increased security on Emily and the Parker family. They were moved to a safe location while Morrison worked with law enforcement across multiple states to locate Ryan Mitchell. Every lead was pursued, every contact checked. But Ryan Mitchell had vanished as completely as Emily had 10 years earlier. And somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the American West, a predator was hunting. The safe house was located in a quiet suburb of Albuquerque, a nondescript 2-story building with reinforced doors and security cameras at every entrance. Emily stood at the upstairs window, watching the street below with the same vigilant awareness she'd developed over 10 years of running. Even with police protection, even with her parents just downstairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was out there somewhere, watching, waiting. "Emily, come eat something." Sarah's voice drifted up from the kitchen, tinged with the same worried tone she'd used when Emily was a child refusing dinner. Some things never changed, but everything else had. Emily descended the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the railing. The house smelled of the pasta Sarah had made for dinner, a recipe Emily remembered from her childhood. It was surreal, being back in her parents' orbit after so long, trying to relearn how to be a daughter when she'd spent a decade being no one at all. In the kitchen, David sat at the table reviewing documents Morrison had provided, restraining order applications, witness statement forms, victim compensation paperwork. He'd thrown himself into the logistics of the situation, the same way he handled medical crises, by focusing on actionable steps rather than the overwhelming emotions beneath. "Morrison called while you were upstairs," David said without looking up. "They still haven't located Mitchell. He's effectively off the grid." Emily's stomach clenched. She sat down at the table across from her father and picked at the pasta her mother had placed in front of her. "He's looking for me. I know he is." "You don't know that," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. She'd spent the past 2 days reading everything she could find about domestic violence, stalking patterns, abuser psychology. She knew the statistics. Many abusers couldn't let go, especially when their victims escaped. The reappearance of a victim 10 years later might be seen as unfinished business. "Mom, I know Ryan. I know how his mind works. He can't stand losing control. When I disappeared, I took away his power over me. Now that I've surfaced, he'll see it as a challenge. He'll want to finish what he started." David finally looked up from his papers, his eyes meeting Emily's. In them, she saw fear and determination in equal measure. Then we don't let you out of our sight. We work with the police to find him first. And if necessary, we relocate. Change your name legally this time, start over somewhere he'll never find you. I'm tired of running, Dad. Emily's voice was quiet but firm. I've been running for 10 years. I want my life back. I want to go to college, get a job, have friends. I want to be Emily Parker again, not some ghost hiding in the shadows. And you will be, Sarah said, reaching across the table to take her daughter's hand. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. That's all that matters right now. Morrison arrived at the safe house the next morning with updates. She'd brought Agent Derek Thompson from the FBI, whose presence immediately made the situation feel more serious, more dangerous. Thompson was in his 40s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of intense focus that came from years of hunting dangerous people. "Miss Parker," Thompson said, settling into a chair across from Emily in the living room. "I've been reviewing your case, and I need to ask you some questions about Ryan Mitchell. Details about his behavior, his patterns, anything that might help us predict where he might go or what he might do." Emily nodded, steeling herself for the interrogation. Over the next 2 hours, she answered every question Thompson threw at her, dredging up memories she'd tried to bury. She described Ryan's apartment, his vehicle, his friends, his favorite places. She recounted his routines, his work schedule, the way he'd tracked her movements when they were together. He was obsessed with control, Emily explained. Everything had to be his way. He'd check my phone constantly, demand to know where I was every minute. He hated when I spent time with my friends or my family. He wanted me completely isolated, completely dependent on him. Thompson made notes, his expression neutral but attentive. "Did he ever mention other relationships? Other girls he'd dated before you?" Emily thought back, sorting through fragmented memories. He mentioned an ex-girlfriend once, said she'd betrayed him by breaking up with him. He said she regretted it later, that she'd tried to come back but he'd refused. The way he talked about it, it was almost triumphant, like he'd won some kind of victory over her. "Do you remember her name?" "I think it was Christina, or Christine, something like that." He didn't talk about her much, but when he did, there was this edge to his voice, like she'd hurt him and he'd never forgiven her. Thompson exchanged glances with Morrison. "We'll track her down. If Ryan had a pattern of abusive behavior with other partners, it strengthens the case against him and might give us leads on his current location." While Thompson and Morrison worked the investigative angle, Sarah and David focused on helping Emily readjust to a life she'd been absent from for a decade. The world had changed significantly since 2010. Smartphones were ubiquitous now. Social media had evolved. Even basic technology felt alien to Emily after years of living off the grid. Sarah set up a new phone for Emily, showing her how to navigate apps and security settings. "You need to be careful online," Sarah warned. "Don't post anything about your location. Don't accept friend requests from people you don't know. And if anyone contacts you claiming to be Ryan or someone connected to him, tell us immediately." Emily held the phone gingerly, as if it might explode in her hands. "This feels wrong, like I'm making myself a target." "You're not a target. You're a person reclaiming her life. But we need to be smart about it." David had taken a leave of absence from the hospital to be with Emily full-time. He spent hours talking with her about the decade she'd missed, filling in gaps about family events, world news, cultural shifts. He told her about her grandparents' deaths. Both of Sarah's parents had passed away while Emily was gone, never knowing what had happened to their granddaughter. That guilt settled over Emily like a heavy blanket, another weight to carry alongside all the others. "They never stopped believing you'd come home," David said quietly. "Your grandmother especially. Even at the end, when she was in hospice, she asked about you, asked if there was any news." Emily wept then, deep shuddering sobs that seemed to come from a place beyond grief. She'd robbed her grandparents of closure, robbed her parents of a decade with their daughter, robbed herself of so many experiences and opportunities. The cost of her survival felt impossibly high, but survival had been the point. She was alive. She was free, and slowly, painfully, she was beginning to rebuild. A week after Emily's discovery, Thompson and Morrison finally located Christina Reeves, Ryan Mitchell's ex-girlfriend from before he'd met Emily. Christina was 34 now, living in Oregon with her husband and 2 children. When Thompson called her, explaining the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I've been waiting for this call for 15 years, Christina finally said. "I always knew Ryan would hurt someone else." Christina agreed to a video interview, and the next day Emily found herself watching a recording of a woman who looked hauntingly familiar, not in features but in the wariness in her eyes. the way she held herself with a kind of defensive readiness. "Ryan and I dated when I was 19, Christina said, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her expression. "He was 21, working at a ski resort. He was charming at first, attentive, made me feel special. But within months, he became possessive. He'd show up at my work unannounced, call me dozens of times a day, get angry if I didn't answer immediately." The parallels to Emily's experience were chilling. "The first time he hit me, I was so shocked I couldn't process it. He apologized immediately, cried, said he'd never do it again. But of course he did. It got worse over the year we were together. He isolated me from my friends and family. He controlled my money, my schedule, everything. When I finally got the courage to leave, he stalked me for months. I had to get a restraining order." "Did the restraining order work?" Morrison asked from off camera. Christina's laugh was bitter. "For a while. But even after it expired, I'd see him sometimes. At the grocery store, at the gym, just watching. He never approached me directly, but he wanted me to know he was there. It went on for almost 2 years before he finally seemed to move on. By then, I'd moved to a different city, changed jobs, basically started over." "Did you ever report the stalking to the police?" "Multiple times, but he was careful never to do anything that could be proven. No threatening messages, no direct contact. Just his presence. A constant reminder that he could get to me if he wanted to." After the video ended, Emily sat in silence, processing what she'd heard. Christina's story was her story, just with different details. Ryan Mitchell had a pattern, a method. He found vulnerable young women, charmed them, then systematically destroyed their sense of self until they were completely under his control. "How many others?" Emily asked Morrison quietly. "How many other women did he do this to?" "We're investigating. So far, we've identified 2 other ex-girlfriends besides Christina. We're trying to contact them, see if they had similar experiences. 2 others, maybe more that hadn't been found yet." Emily felt sick thinking about it, about the trail of trauma Ryan had left in his wake. But she also felt something else, determination. She wasn't going to let him hurt anyone else. "I want to testify," Emily said suddenly, turning to Thompson. "When you find him, when you build a case, I want to testify. I want to tell my story in court. I want him to face consequences for what he did." Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's brave, Miss Parker. But you need to understand, building a case against Ryan for crimes that occurred 10 years ago will be extremely difficult. We have no physical evidence, no medical records, no contemporaneous reports. It's your word against his. Then we make my word count. We show the pattern with his other victims. We show that I wasn't making this up, that I had legitimate reasons to run." "There's another angle we're pursuing," Morrison interjected. "Ryan's disappearance coinciding with your discovery is suspicious. If we can prove he's stalking you now, that gives us grounds for current charges, not just historical ones. We've been monitoring online activity related to your case, looking for any sign that he's searching for information about you. And they'd found something troubling. Someone using a series of proxy servers had been accessing news articles about Emily's discovery, searching for details about her location, her parents' contact information, even the safe house addresses used by the Albuquerque police. The digital fingerprints weren't definitive, but they matched Ryan Mitchell's known patterns of internet use. He was hunting for her, and he was getting closer. The safe house suddenly felt less safe. Morrison increased security, added more officers on rotation, installed additional surveillance equipment. Sarah and David barely slept, taking turns staying awake through the night, watching over their daughter the way they'd once watched over her crib when she was an infant. Emily felt the weight of her parents' fear, their love, their desperate need to protect her from a threat they couldn't see. It reminded her of why she'd run in the first place, to keep them safe. But now, 10 years later, her disappearance had accomplished nothing except delaying the inevitable confrontation. "We need to draw him out," Emily said during a strategy meeting with Morrison, Thompson, and several other law enforcement officials. "Use me as bait." "Absolutely not," David said immediately from where he and Sarah sat against the wall. "We're not putting you in danger." "I'm already in danger, Dad. At least this way, we can control the situation. Set a trap. Catch him before he catches me." Thompson considered this, his analytical mind working through the logistics. "It's risky. If something goes wrong, something is already going wrong," Emily interrupted. "He's out there, getting closer. We can either wait for him to strike on his terms, or we can take control of the situation on ours." The debate went on for hours, with law enforcement weighing the risks and benefits. Sarah and David adamantly opposed. and Emily insisting that she had the right to make decisions about her own safety. Finally, a compromise was reached. They would arrange for Emily to make a controlled public appearance, a press conference where she'd tell her story. It would be heavily secured, with undercover officers throughout the crowd, watching for anyone matching Ryan Mitchell's description. If Ryan was monitoring news about Emily, he wouldn't be able to resist showing up. And when he did, they'd be ready. The press conference was scheduled for the following Wednesday at the Albuquerque Police Department headquarters. Morrison's team spent days preparing, coordinating with local and federal law enforcement, setting up security protocols, planning for every possible contingency. Emily spent those days writing her statement, trying to condense 10 years of pain and survival into a few coherent paragraphs that would resonate with the public while also sending a message to Ryan. I'm not afraid of you anymore. The night before the press conference, Emily couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of the safe house watching the street below, wondering if Ryan was out there somewhere, watching back. Part of her hoped he was. Part of her wanted the confrontation, the closure, the chance to face the person who'd stolen so much from her. But another part, the part that still remembered being 17 and terrified, just wanted to run again. Emily? Sarah's voice came from the doorway. You should try to get some rest. Emily turned to look at her mother, this woman who'd aged 10 years in her absence, who'd never given up hope even when everyone else had. Mom, if something happens tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. There will be dozens of officers there. But if it does, I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not calling. For all the pain I caused. Sarah crossed the room and pulled Emily into an embrace. You did what you had to do to survive. I understand that now. And whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. As a family. They stood like that for a long moment. Mother and daughter, bound by love and loss and the fragile hope of redemption. Outside, the night deepened, and somewhere in the darkness, a predator waited. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring justice or chaos or something in between. But tonight, Emily Parker was home, surrounded by people who loved her, preparing to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her one February afternoon 10 years ago. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of bright, merciless sunshine that made everything feel overexposed. Emily stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the safe house, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Sarah had helped her choose clothes for the press conference, a simple navy blazer and white blouse that made her look professional, credible, like someone whose story deserved to be believed. You look beautiful, Sarah said from the doorway, though her eyes were red from crying. She'd spent the night alternating between pride in her daughter's courage and terror at what might happen today. Emily turned to face her mother. I look like someone pretending to be put together. That's what everyone looks like at press conferences. Sarah managed a weak smile. Fake it until you make it, right? Downstairs, David was reviewing the security arrangements with Morrison and Thompson for what felt like the 100th time. Every entrance to the police headquarters would be monitored. Undercover officers would be positioned throughout the crowd. Snipers would be on nearby rooftops. Anyone entering would pass through metal detectors and be screened against a database of known associates of Ryan Mitchell. It's as secure as we can make it, Thompson assured David. If Mitchell shows up, we'll grab him before he gets within 50 feet of Emily. And if he doesn't show up? David's voice was tight with anxiety. If this whole thing is for nothing and we've just given him more information about Emily's whereabouts, then we continue the investigation. But my gut says he'll be there. Men like Mitchell can't resist the opportunity to exert power, to remind their victims that they're watching. He'll want Emily to know he's still out there. The drive to the police headquarters took 20 minutes. Emily wedged between her parents in the back of an unmarked police vehicle. The streets of Albuquerque looked surreal through the tinted windows. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that somewhere among them might be a predator hunting his prey. When they arrived at the headquarters, Emily was ushered through a back entrance and into a secure room where she could wait until the press conference began. The room was sterile and windowless, furnished with uncomfortable chairs and a water cooler that hummed incessantly. Morrison came in periodically with updates. The media was arriving, the crowd was growing, security was in position. We've identified several individuals who warrant closer monitoring, Morrison said during one of her visits. One man who purchased a ticket to Albuquerque from Wyoming yesterday. Another who's been photographed at multiple events related to your case. We're running facial recognition on everyone entering the building. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched a bottle of water. The statement she'd prepared sat on the table in front of her, the words she'd agonized over for days now seeming inadequate to capture the complexity of her experience. At 11 a.m., it was time. Morrison led Emily through a corridor to the main press room, where cameras and journalists packed every available space. The podium stood at the front, flanked by the American flag and the New Mexico state flag, a microphone waiting to amplify Emily's voice to the world. Sarah and David took seats in the front row, their faces masks of barely controlled emotion. Thompson stood against the wall, scanning the crowd with the practiced eye of someone trained to spot threats. Uniformed officers lined the perimeter of the room. Emily approached the podium, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The lights were blinding, the cameras intimidating, but she forced herself to focus on the statement in her hands, on the words she needed to say. "My name is Emily Parker," she began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. 10 years ago, I disappeared from Boulder, Colorado. Today I want to tell you why. She told them about Ryan Mitchell, though she didn't use his name at first, just someone I was in a relationship with. She described the pattern of abuse, the escalation of violence, the threats against her family. She explained her decision to disappear, the decade spent living under false identities, the constant fear that had defined her existence. "I want to be clear about something," Emily said, looking directly into the cameras. "I didn't run away because I was rebelling or seeking adventure. I ran away because I believed it was the only way to survive. I was 17 years old, isolated and terrified, and I made the best decision I could with the information I had." She paused, taking a breath, then continued with the part of her statement that had been most difficult to write. "To my parents, Sarah and David Parker, who never stopped searching for me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the pain my disappearance caused. I'm sorry for the years you spent not knowing if I was alive or dead. I'm sorry for every birthday, every holiday, every milestone you experienced without me. But I need you to understand that leaving wasn't about running away from you. It was about protecting you from someone who threatened to hurt you if I stayed." In the front row, Sarah was openly weeping, David's arm around her shoulders as he fought to maintain his composure. Emily then did something that made Morrison tense visibly. She named Ryan Mitchell. She described him, gave details about his appearance and his background. She warned other women who might encounter him to be cautious, and she made a direct appeal to him. "Ryan, if you're watching this, I want you to know something. You don't control me anymore, you don't scare me anymore. I survived. I built a life despite everything you did to destroy me, and I'm not hiding anymore. If you want to find me, here I am. But this time, I'm not alone. This time, I have people who will protect me. And this time, you'll face consequences for your actions." The boldness of Emily's words sent a ripple through the crowd. Journalists furiously typed notes. Cameras captured every moment. And somewhere in the packed room, Thompson's team monitored for any unusual reactions. Emily fielded questions from reporters for 30 minutes, answering honestly about her experiences while being careful not to compromise the ongoing investigation. She talked about the difficulty of living without documentation, the physical toll of years of farm labor, the psychological impact of constant fear. She described the moment she was stopped by Trooper Mendez, the mixture of relief and terror she'd felt when her true identity was discovered. "Do you regret disappearing?" one reporter asked. Emily considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the pain it caused my family and the life experiences I missed. But do I regret saving my own life? No, I don't regret that." As the press conference concluded and Morrison began ushering Emily off the stage, Thompson received a message through his earpiece. His expression changed subtly and he moved quickly toward Morrison, whispering something urgent. Morrison's face paled. She grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her away from the crowd more forcefully than necessary. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, alarm rising in her chest. "We need to get you out of here now." They hustled Emily through a side door, Sarah and David scrambling to follow, confusion and fear evident in their faces. Behind them, uniformed officers began clearing the press room, citing a security concern. In a secure conference room, Thompson pulled up security footage on a laptop. "We got a hit on facial recognition 15 minutes into the press conference. This man entered the building through the main entrance. The image showed a man in his mid-30s with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. But even with the obscured features, Emily recognized him immediately. The way he carried himself, the shape of his jaw, the particular way he walked. It was Ryan Mitchell. "Where is he now?" Morrison demanded. "That's the problem. He went into the men's restroom on the second floor 20 minutes ago and hasn't come out. We have officers posted at all exits, but the building is large with multiple access points. He could be anywhere." Emily felt the old fear trying to claw its way back, the instinct to run that had defined her life for so long. But she forced herself to stay grounded, to remember that she wasn't 17 anymore, that she wasn't alone. "He came here," Emily said slowly, working through the implications. "He heard my challenge and he came. That means he's desperate, sloppy. He wouldn't have risked coming here if he was thinking clearly." Thompson nodded. "Which makes him more dangerous. Desperate people do unpredictable things." The building went into lockdown. Officers swept every floor, checking rooms and closets, examining security footage from every camera. Outside, SWAT teams positioned themselves at strategic points. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of the police headquarters surrounded by emergency vehicles. Sarah clutched Emily's hand so tightly it hurt. "This is my fault. I never should have agreed to this." "This is Ryan's fault," Emily corrected. "Not yours, not mine, his." For 2 hours they waited in the secure conference room while officers searched the building. Emily listened to the radio chatter, the tense updates about cleared floors and checked rooms. Ryan Mitchell seemed to have vanished into thin air, the same way she had 10 years ago. Then at 2:17 p.m., an officer's voice crackled over the radio with an edge of urgency. "Suspect located. 3rd floor. Maintenance corridor. He's not responding to commands." Thompson and Morrison raced out of the conference room, leaving Emily with her parents and 2 armed guards. Through the closed door, they could hear commotion in the hallway, running footsteps, shouted orders, the organized chaos of a crisis response. 20 minutes later, Morrison returned. Her expression was grim but relieved. "We have him in custody. He was found in a maintenance corridor, apparently trying to access the building's ventilation system. He had a backpack with him containing duct tape, zip ties, and a knife." The implication was clear. Ryan Mitchell had come to the press conference planning to abduct Emily, to silence her, to reassert his control over her by any means necessary. The thought made Emily's stomach turn. "Is he talking?" David asked, his doctor's voice steady despite the situation. "Not yet." He lawyered up immediately. "But the evidence speaks for itself. He violated the terms of a previous restraining order by coming within 500 feet of his victim. He was carrying weapons into a government building, and the items in his backpack suggest premeditation of a violent crime." Emily felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd carried for so long it had become part of her baseline existence. Ryan Mitchell was in custody. He couldn't hurt her anymore. He couldn't threaten her family. The nightmare that had begun 10 years ago was finally ending. But as Morrison continued talking about charges and prosecution and what would happen next, Emily realized that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning. The start of a long legal process, of testimony and trials, of reliving trauma in courtrooms and on witness stands. "I want to see him," Emily said suddenly. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. "Emily, I don't think that's a good idea," Sarah began. "I need to see him. I need to look him in the eye and know that he can't hurt me anymore. I need that closure." Morrison exchanged glances with Thompson. "It's highly irregular and potentially traumatic. Everything about this situation is highly irregular, and I've already survived the worst trauma. Please let me see him." After much debate and consultation with department supervisors, they agreed to allow Emily a brief, supervised viewing. Not a confrontation, not an interrogation, just a chance for Emily to see Ryan Mitchell behind bars, to understand viscerally that the threat was contained. They led her to the holding area, where Ryan sat in an interview room handcuffed to a table. Through the one-way glass, Emily studied him. He'd aged, gotten heavier, lost some hair, but the essential Ryan was still there. The set of his jaw, the particular way he held his shoulders, the energy of barely contained aggression. Morrison stood beside Emily. "He can't see you. He doesn't know you're watching." Emily nodded, unable to speak. Seeing Ryan after all these years was surreal, like confronting a ghost that had haunted her for a decade. But he wasn't a ghost. He was just a man, a dangerous, damaged man, but still just a man, not the monster her fear had made him into. As she watched, Ryan's lawyer entered the room and began speaking to him in low tones. Ryan's expression was sullen, defensive, the look of someone who believed the world had wronged him, that he was the victim in all of this. "He doesn't think he did anything wrong," Emily said quietly. "That's what makes people like him so dangerous. They genuinely believe their violence is justified, that their victims deserve it. That's why the justice system exists, Morrison replied. To hold people accountable when they can't hold themselves accountable. Emily watched for a few more minutes, then turned away. She'd seen what she needed to see. Ryan Mitchell wasn't a demon or a nightmare or an unstoppable force. He was a criminal in handcuffs, facing years in prison for his actions. She'd won, not by running, not by hiding, but by surviving. And finally, after 10 years, by confronting the truth. As they left the holding area, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in a decade. Genuine freedom. Not the false freedom of hiding, of living under assumed names, of always looking over her shoulder. Real freedom. The kind that came from facing your fears and discovering you were stronger than them. Outside the police headquarters, the sun was beginning to set, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and pink. Emily stood with her parents watching the news vans pack up their equipment, watching the crowd disperse, watching the ordinary world resume its ordinary rhythms. What happens now? Sarah asked, her arm around Emily's waist. Emily thought about the question. What happened now? College applications to catch up on, a driver's license to obtain, a life to rebuild from the ground up, therapy to process 10 years of trauma, court dates and testimony and the slow grind of the justice system, relationships to mend and friendships to forge, and all the ordinary challenges of being a 27-year-old woman trying to figure out who she was and what she wanted. Now, Emily said, I get to find out who Emily Parker is supposed to be. The real Emily Parker. Not the scared teenager who ran away. Not the ghost who hid for 10 years. Just me. David pulled both his wife and daughter into an embrace. Whoever you turn out to be will be here every step of the way. Every step. And for the first time in 10 years, Emily believed him. The autumn leaves in Boulder were at their peak when Emily Parker returned to Colorado for the first time in 10 years. It was November 2020, 9 months after her discovery in New Mexico, and the small college town looked both exactly the same and completely different through her eyes. The Flatirons still loomed majestically against the western sky. The campus still buzzed with students hurrying between classes, but Emily herself had changed so fundamentally that everything else seemed altered by her transformation. She stood on the front porch of her childhood home on Spruce Street, the key trembling in her hand. Sarah and David had returned to Boulder 2 months earlier to prepare the house, but Emily had needed more time. Time to work with her therapist, Dr. Rachel Chen, on processing the trauma. Time to testify at Ryan Mitchell's preliminary hearing. Time to simply exist without fear for the first time in a decade. You don't have to go in if you're not ready, Sarah said gently, standing beside her daughter on the porch where she'd last said goodbye 10 years ago. But Emily shook her head. I need to do this. I need to prove to myself that I can. She turned the key and pushed open the door. The house smelled of fresh paint and lemon furniture polish. Her parents had cleaned obsessively in preparation for her return, trying to erase the dust of years while preserving the memories. Emily walked through the living room, her fingers trailing over familiar furniture, the couch where she'd done homework, the bookshelf filled with novels she'd loved, the piano she'd learned to play before discovering her true passion for violin. Upstairs, her bedroom had been preserved like a time capsule. Band posters on the walls, a stack of college brochures on the desk, the violin case in the corner. Emily picked up the violin gently, opened the case, and found the instrument exactly as she'd left it. She lifted it to her shoulder, positioned the bow, and drew it across the strings. The sound was discordant, out of tune from years of neglect. But Emily felt tears streaming down her face because she was here, she was home, and she could play again if she wanted to. She could do anything. Over the following weeks, Emily began the painstaking process of rebuilding her life. She met with an academic counselor at the University of Colorado to discuss completing her education. Despite the decade-long gap, her test scores and the unusual circumstances of her case made her an appealing candidate for admission. She enrolled for the spring semester, planning to major in social work with a focus on domestic violence intervention. I want to help people who are going through what I went through, Emily explained to her advisor during orientation. I want them to know there's a way out, that survival is possible. The legal case against Ryan Mitchell proceeded through the criminal justice system with agonizing slowness. He was charged with multiple counts: violation of a restraining order, attempted kidnapping, stalking, illegal possession of weapons in a government building. The prosecution also worked to build cases around his treatment of Emily 10 years earlier. though the lack of physical evidence made that more challenging. Emily met regularly with Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in domestic violence cases. Walsh had prosecuted dozens of abusers over her career, but Emily's case was unique in its scope and duration. The defense is going to argue that the historical abuse allegations are unprovable, Walsh explained during one of their prep sessions. They'll say it's been too long, that memories fade, that you're making it up for attention. We need to be ready for that. I am ready, Emily said firmly. I've been ready for 10 years. They built a comprehensive case that included testimony from Christina Reeves and Ryan's 2 other ex-girlfriends, all of whom described similar patterns of controlling and abusive behavior. They compiled evidence of Ryan's movements in the weeks leading up to the press conference showing premeditation. They had the physical evidence from his backpack, the zip ties, the duct tape, the knife, but the most powerful evidence was Emily herself. The trial began in March 2021, held in a Boulder courthouse where Emily had never imagined she'd set foot. The media attention was intense. The case had captured national interest as a story of survival, justice, and the long shadows cast by domestic violence. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. News anchors debated the complexities of victim behavior. Social media exploded with opinions about Emily's decision to disappear. Emily tried to ignore it all. She focused on her therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, on her coursework at the university, on rebuilding relationships with old friends who'd grown up and moved on while she was gone. Jessica Chen, her best friend from high school, was now a graduate student in engineering. They met for coffee awkwardly at first, then more comfortably as they found their rhythm again. I thought you were dead, Jessica admitted one afternoon, her hands wrapped around a mug at a campus coffee shop. We all did. We had a memorial service for you at school. I gave a speech about what a good friend you were, and the whole time you were alive somewhere, living a completely different life. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry for all of it. Jessica reached across the table to squeeze Emily's hand. You did what you had to do. I get that now, and I'm just glad you're back. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Emily sat through days of testimony, watching as prosecutors built their case methodically, listening as defense attorneys tried to tear apart her credibility. Ryan Mitchell sat at the defense table, expressionless, occasionally whispering to his lawyers, but never once looking directly at Emily. That was fine. Emily didn't need him to acknowledge her anymore. When it was her turn to testify, Emily took the stand with the statement she'd prepared with Walsh and Dr. Chen. She described meeting Ryan, the initial charm that had masked his true nature. She detailed the escalation of abuse, psychological first, then physical. She explained the isolation, the control, the threats that had made her feel like disappearing was her only option. The defense attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit named Marcus Brennan, tried to break her down during cross-examination. Ms. Parker, isn't it true that you never reported this alleged abuse to any authority? No police reports, no medical records, no documentation whatsoever. I was 17 and terrified. I didn't know how to ask for help. Isn't it convenient that you're making these allegations now, when Ryan Mitchell can't possibly defend himself against accusations from a decade ago? There's nothing convenient about any of this, Mr. Brennan. I spent 10 years of my life running and hiding because of what your client did to me. I missed my grandparents' funerals. I caused my parents unimaginable pain. I lost a decade of opportunities and experiences. The only thing I gained was my life, and even that was diminished by constant fear. Brennan tried different angles, suggesting Emily had run away for other reasons and was now blaming Ryan to deflect responsibility. He implied she'd lived a carefree life working on farms while her parents suffered. He even suggested the entire abuse narrative was fabricated to explain away her poor choices. But Emily remained steady, her voice clear, her story consistent. And when Walsh brought out the testimony of Ryan's other victims, when the pattern became undeniable, even Brennan's aggressive tactics couldn't obscure the truth. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Emily spent that time in a state of suspended animation, unable to focus on anything else, waiting for 12 strangers to decide whether her suffering mattered, whether her truth would be believed. When the verdict came back, Emily was surrounded by her parents, by Jessica, by Detective Morrison who'd flown in from Albuquerque, by a community that had rallied around her. They sat in the courtroom as the jury foreman stood to read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Emily felt something break open inside her, not pain, but release. 10 years of carrying that weight alone, and now a jury had said, "We believe you. What happened to you was real." You didn't deserve it. He's responsible. Ryan Mitchell was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with additional time possible if the historical abuse charges were successfully prosecuted in a separate trial. It wasn't enough. No amount of time could give Emily back what she'd lost. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was consequence. After the sentencing, Emily stood on the courthouse steps and gave a brief statement to the assembled media. She talked about the importance of believing victims, of providing resources for people in abusive relationships, of understanding that escape sometimes looked different than people expected. I want other young people in dangerous relationships to know that you have options, Emily said, looking directly into the cameras. You don't have to do what I did. There are hotlines, shelters, people who will help you. But if you do have to run, if that's what it takes to survive, then run. Your life is worth saving, even if the path to safety isn't perfect or pretty or what anyone else thinks it should be. The months following the trial were a different kind of challenge. Emily had spent so long focused on survival, on testifying, on seeing Ryan held accountable, that she'd avoided thinking about what came after. Now she had to figure out who Emily Parker was when she wasn't running or hiding or fighting. Therapy with Dr. Chen helped. Emily worked through layers of trauma, not just from Ryan, but from the decade of transient living, from the guilt of what she'd put her parents through, from the complicated grief of having lost so much time. You're mourning your own life, Dr. Chen explained during one session. The life you might have had if Ryan Mitchell hadn't entered it. That's a valid grief, and you need to allow yourself to feel it. Emily also began volunteering at a local domestic violence shelter, using her story to help other survivors understand they weren't alone. She spoke at high schools about recognizing the signs of unhealthy relationships. She worked with legislators on bills to improve protections for abuse victims. Her pain, channeled into purpose, became a source of strength rather than shame. Her relationship with her parents evolved too. Sarah had to learn to give Emily space, to resist the urge to overprotect after years of absence. David worked through his anger, at Ryan for hurting his daughter, at himself for not seeing the signs, at Emily for not trusting them enough to ask for help. Family therapy sessions were difficult but necessary, helping them rebuild trust and communication. We're not who we were 10 years ago, Emily said during one session. None of us are. We have to learn to be a family with who we've become, not who we used to be. It was wise beyond her years, that understanding. Emily had learned hard lessons about identity and transformation, about the ways trauma changed people, about the choice between letting pain define you or using it to grow. By the time the leaves changed again in autumn 2021, Emily had completed her first full year of college. She'd made new friends, joined a support group for abuse survivors, even started dating cautiously, a graduate student named Marcus who was patient and kind and willing to move at Emily's pace. She stood in the same place on the CU campus where she'd once imagined attending as a freshman, 10 years late but finally present. Students rushed past her toward classes, absorbed in their own dramas and dreams, unaware they were passing someone who'd fought desperately for the right to this ordinary moment. Emily pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Hey Mom, I just wanted to tell you, I got an A on my social work exam, the one about trauma-informed care." Sarah's joy was audible through the phone. "Oh honey, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. Thanks. And Mom, I'm okay. I'm really, actually okay." There was a pause, then Sarah's voice came through thick with emotion. "I know you are, sweetheart, I can hear it." After hanging up, Emily sat on a bench and watched the campus life swirl around her. She thought about the 17-year-old who'd walked away from this world, terrified and desperate. She thought about the woman she'd become in the years of running, hardened, wary, surviving but not living. And she thought about who she was now, at 28, finally beginning to thrive. The story didn't have a perfect ending. Emily still had nightmares sometimes. She still struggled with trust and intimacy. She still carried scars, visible and invisible, from everything she'd endured. But she'd learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the damage didn't exist. It was about integrating those experiences into a larger story, about refusing to let trauma be the only defining feature of her identity. She was Emily Parker, daughter, student, survivor, advocate, friend. She was a woman who'd disappeared and found herself again, who'd been broken and painstakingly rebuilt, who'd lost 10 years but gained an unshakable understanding of her own strength. The sun was setting over the Flatirons as Emily walked home, casting long shadows across the campus. Tomorrow she had classes, homework, therapy, She had a lunch date with Jessica and a volunteer shift at the shelter. She had a life, messy and complicated and occasionally difficult, but hers. She'd come home. Not to the same home, not to the same life, not even as the same person, but home nonetheless, to Boulder and to herself, ready to write the next chapter of a story that refused to end in tragedy. And that, Emily thought as she unlocked the front door on Spruce Street, was the most profound victory of all.